Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players, I'm the RJB0, and welcome back to Yuginomics 101, where I teach you the simple economics behind Yu-Gi-Oh, and you learn how to make a profit in Yu-Gi-Oh without ever ripping anybody off or even pulling the nuts. In the last video, we learned that a Yu-Gi-Oh card has a market that looks a lot like this, where there is supply of the card and demand for the card. Please ignore these bold lines over here, they are for later in the video. We learned that demand looks like this, because when a price that a person is asking for the card is higher, fewer people are willing to trade at that price. See, the quantity is low. When a person is asking for a lower price for a card, more people are willing to trade or buy at that price. See how the quantity is high on the demand curve. We also learned that the opposite is true, that when a person is not willing to buy a card for very much, then fewer people are going to be willing to sell to that person or trade with that person. If a person is willing to buy at a greater price, then a lot more people are willing to sell or trade that card. See how the price is higher up here than down here. We also learned why eBay prices are so reliable to go by. It's because of this little point where they cross down here called the equilibrium, where on eBay people were willing to sell for lower, but those lower ones got bought up, and the number of people willing to pay for the card at that price are the same as the number of people willing to sell the card at that price. We use the example of a gold rare BLS, where it sits around $30, that's the equilibrium price. A couple people were probably willing to sell at $20 or $25, but many more people were willing to buy at that price than there were cards available at that price, so they bought up until the number of people willing to sell was the same as the number of people willing to buy at that $30. And of course there were some people who were asking a greater price, but not very many people were willing to buy at that price. So that's why eBay prices, that buy it now lowest price, is very reliable for your price of a card, and it basically represents the true value of a card. In this video, I will be discussing the actual effects of supply and demand on price. It will be a good segue into my final video, which is actually my secret for trading smartly and building up my trade binder and making a Yu-Gi-Oh profit. In this video, I will be explaining a couple of things, including the Billy Break effect, why cards are so expensive at sneak previews, and why reprints really reduce the value of a card. So the first concept you have to understand in order to get this whole supply and demand thing is that the price of cards doesn't just change randomly. It's not like a deck does well and suddenly the price changes. Just the price spontaneously changes. It's the same with a reprint. If a reprint is announced, people don't suddenly start selling for a lower price. You saw that with Tour Guide. Tour Guides held their price for a very long time, even after the announcement was made of the Battle Pack Epic Dawn, because people were still willing to buy at that price. The Billy Break effect works because let's use Inzectors as an example. Before YCS Indy, after the format change, people thought Inzectors were terrible. People didn't buy Inzectors. People didn't want to use Inzectors because they thought they were dead. But then, Billy Break came along, he got top 4 at YCS Indy, more people started considering using the deck, which meant more people started trading and buying for dragonflies, centipedes, gigamantises, hornets, and ladybugs. Because more people were buying that card, the ones that were at the lower prices started to get bought. There were more people willing to buy the card than there were people willing to sell at the lower prices, so the price went up. I hope that makes sense. I can't really ask questions in this video. You can't really reply. I'll show it on the graph. So let's say that this is the demand for say a Hornet before Billy Break gets top 4 at YCS Indy. It's a relatively low demand. But then Billy Break wins or gets the top at YCS Indy with Inzectors, and people start thinking maybe I should use Inzectors. They start buying more hornets. So the demand goes out, the quantity increases, which means that the hornets that were going at the previous equilibrium price all got bought up until the number of people willing to sell was the same as the number of people willing to buy, which was at a higher price. See how this new demand curve hits the supply curve at a higher price than at the old demand curve. A similar effect happens with reprints. Now, what happens with reprints is kind of two-tiered thing. When reprints are announced, first the demand goes down. People stop buying the card because they know that later they can get a more expensive version of it. So the demand decreases, having the opposite effect of the Billy Brake effect. So people stop buying the card, which means that people who are selling the card at the lower price stop having their cards bought. So people start selling at lower and lower prices in order to meet the lack of demand for that card. Later, though, when the reprint actually comes out, you see another thing happen, which is represented by this bold line, where the supply of that card increases. So there are more of the card available, which means that the equilibrium price is lower. That makes sense? You can see how that happens. It's a pretty basic thing. When there's a lot of demand, but not a lot of supply, high price. Where there's a lot of supply, not a lot of demand, low price. The best example of how this happens is at a sneak preview where cards are totally inflated in price, and that's because there is a very high demand for the good cards in that set because, people haven't found the limitations of that card. They haven't figured out what makes it not as good as they think it is. But also there is a very low supply because the mass release hasn't come out yet. There's a very limited number of that card. So lots of demand, not a lot of supply, huge price inflation. Now this doesn't actually help you all that much with your making a profit, but these concepts are going to be absolutely essential to my next video where I tell you my trade secret, so to speak. Just remember, supply high means price low. Supply low means price high. Demand high means price high. Demand low means price low. So there you go. That is this video. Next video, I will tell you the greatest secret I have ever learned to making a profit in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is the RJB0 signing out.